old city and down around the old city, everywhere I looked at Jerusalem granite, it was like I was on mushrooms. Turn to the side, stops. But everywhere in where the carved stone was, it was like being on psilocybin. So I was with a buddy of mine who's done psilocybin before. Had no effect. My oldest son was also with me. He didn't notice anything. So my first thought was, okay, there's, Jerusalem granite isn't actually a granite. I think it's like an Ordovician limestone. So I'm, okay, there's got to be high quartz content here, something to do with the specularity effect or whatever. But the fact that other people weren't seeing it seemed like it wasn't strictly an optic phenomenon. It could be entoptic, which is the...
Could be what?
Entoptic.
Entoptic. Mm-hmm.
Basically, the eye is perceiving phenomena as a visual stimulus because it's not able to parse it in any other manner.
Uh-huh. I see. So you seem to have delved very deep into esoteric states and...
Yes, after the pronounced work with Dennis, I got into what I guess you call mainstream Freemasonry. So I went through every regular body of the York Rite. So Craft Lodge, Royal Arch, Cryptic Rite, Preceptory, York Rite Sovereign College, Allied Masonic Degrees, Holy Royal Arch, Knights Templar Priests. I think that's it for the bodies, but all told about 20 different degrees and orders.
Okay, well, it's something I know zero about, absolutely nothing about Masonry. No.
Despite the fact that the liturgy is anchored in the Old Testament, it has more in common with Buddhism than it does with Christianity, in the fact that it's a mystery tradition in its essence.
Uh-huh.
So anchored around the use of the object lesson, the structure. I mean, if Peterson wants a model of a hierarchy, Freemasonry is not too bad a one to look at, really. The basis of the organization is the principle of acting of your own free will and accord.
Uh-huh.
So I think there's something significant in there. Definitely people who like to coalesce around corrupted power have issues with that kind of an attitude. Up until, I think, 1967, you could be excommunicated from the Catholic Church if you were a Freemason. Found it to be a Freemason.
All right, yeah. I know this very conservative Catholic, and he has the view that Freemasonry is really the devil, right? It's just he has this whole conspiracy theory that is there's an element of anti-Semitism in it, and this guy I know, it's funny because before he was a Stalinist, right? He was a really hardcore communist, and he really thought that and then he converted to this very strong form of Catholicism, and so basically he thinks there's this global Freemasonry conspiracy of some kind that is bringing people, destroying the world, and
I joked. Well, the only Masonic conspiracy I saw was sending me to district office and chapter.
To what? The district office? Yeah.
So the chair or the office is called the Grand Superintendent. It's the equivalent to the District Deputy Grand Master in Craft Lodge. So it's your responsibility to act as the representative of the Grand First Principal to visit all of the chapters in the district for their installations and inspect the work of a degree.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it's very secretive, right? Like, how much can you speak about it? Like,
we've all got websites, man.
Yeah. Okay.
Every Masonic organization I know has a public website.
I see. Okay. But I'm just, my curiosity is like, what is the work that you do? Like,
much of the work is really the work of running an organization. So as you go through the different chairs in any of the Masonic bodies, they have similar roles and responsibilities. So you basically go from guy at the door to the master of the lodge, and learning different sets of skills as you go through, our skills and responsibilities as you go through each one of those chairs.
Huh.
And then that local organization is then mimicked up at the district level, and then once again up at the grand body level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's the so it's a developmental path, somewhat, or self-developmental and then developmental of the society as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's the phrasing that they use to make good men better. So the
To
way
make
I see it,
good men better. Okay.
yeah. So the way I see it is you're exercising discipline, principally through the memory work that you have to do for ritual. So there's two main things that go on in a lodge. You've got the business of running an organization. So you've got minutes, a regular agenda, stuff is running by Robert's Rules of Order, all that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, you have the ritual work. So those two pieces kind of work together. And then in ritual space, you're basically taking the candidate, putting them into a narrative in a specific position so they can experience that story for themselves. And then from the craft lodge, and the two principal figures, three figures: Solomon, king of Israel; Hiram, king of Tyre; and Hiram of Biff. And Hiram of Biff is the master builder, architect.
Slow down, man. I'm not following it.
Yeah, Solomon, king of Israel.
Yeah.
Hiram, king of Tyre, and Hiram of Biff are the three principal characters within Freemasonry. So the two kings are very obvious. Hiram of Biff is considered in Freemasonry to be the master architect or master builder of Solomon's temple. And his story is just before the completion of the temple, he's accosted by three ruffians who want to extort the secrets from him, and rather than give up the secrets, he forfeits his life.
Okay.
Pretty deep lesson in integrity there.
People what?
A pretty deep lesson in integrity there.
Right. Yeah. I imagine it's about integrity in some deep sense, right?
And it was interesting watching some Peterson biblical lectures, because there's stuff out of there that's right out of Masonic ritual. Really,
for example?
The one passage in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's significant to the Royal Arch. There's a few other things in there that, some of it digs into the deeper mysteries of the degree. So there's a lot of stuff I could talk about easily. That's public domain. Any of the science secrets and stuff like that, then I'm under obligation not to say anything about those specifically, unless I know someone's actually.
Okay. So what? I guess we're talking because we've sort of run into each other in circles in discussions about Jordan Peterson on some level. How do we get to talking to each other?
I can't remember. I think it was something through Twitter. I'd followed Rebel Wisdom stuff for a while, and I think I saw that you were tag writing stuff for Rebel Wisdom. That's some of the best stuff I see coming out around the dark web, like better analysis. You've got a core group of people who are talking in and around the Rubin Report, and then you've got some outliers like Paul Vanderklay and a few others. But Rebel Wisdom, I think, is a really solid anchor in the whole space, and I've seen alignment of interest. So
I agree, and I was blogging, and I went to London and did one of their men's groups, and they've got a very solid organization with a lot of intelligent things going on, I think. Yeah. And I think, well, I wrote several essays about Peterson, mostly in response. Well, it was I think just a developmental practice of trying to work out his thinking in my own mind. And also as a defense against people who were attacking him in some kind of a way. So I kind of jumped into that, and I noticed that there's a lot of people who are a lot of people who are very hostile towards him, who I knew were on the progressive side of the and I had a lot of progressive friends, and they found it strange that I would be writing about Jordan Peterson in some sense, and so. So there seems to be something very compelling going on there. What do you think about that? What's going on?
There's a cognitive dissonance going on. I mean, you've got part of the FUD factor, the fear, uncertainty, doubt that's constantly being pumped out by the media.
Fear, uncertainty, doubt. Yeah. Okay.
So there's an observation that stress can drop IQ by 30 points.
The what?
Stress can drop IQ by 30 points, relatively. I think in a lot of ways, people are just getting dumbed down. So you've got massive amounts of complexity, which people are very poorly adapted to deal with in the first place.
Yeah.
That's constantly ramping up. And then you've got this, an introduction of ideology into the social discourse, which I think kind of roots back to Steinem.
Roots back to which, who?
Gloria Steinem.
Gloria Steinem. Okay.
The concept of the patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is the archetypal gimmick in the transactional analysis sense. I mean, you set a bound like patriarchy, you cannot have an adult conversation about anything in that domain after that point.
Yeah, what's going on with that? That might be a good thing to talk about, actually. Yeah, actually, it's kind of what I've been writing about recently. It's like this word patriarchy. It's like it's a misnomer almost in every way. It's like doesn't describe historical reality. You know?
Yeah, it's kind of made up BS, really.
Yeah.
I mean, Peterson addressed it to a degree where there is a criticism about hierarchy, but anthropologically, we don't talk about patriarchies. We talk about patrilineal, matrilineal. There's this reinvention of words or, salting the lexical field. So we can't use the word discrimination anymore because it's automatically associated with racial discrimination. You can't have a power of discernment.
Yeah.
Like a weird double think going on with the whole political correct movement. So I think the two concepts, the patriarchy and the whole idea that the personal is political, has basically set a context for people to dump all of their shit in the public sphere.
So you think those two things, the fact that the patriarchy and that the person is political?
The personal is political. I think those
personal is political. Mm-hmm.
Those are two seeds that kind of set up for trouble. I mean, people don't really look 20, 30,000 iterations down how that path is going to go. And if you set up the basis for conversation where you can't have an adult conversation, and then you start making it okay for people to just kind of dump their unfiltered personal shit in the public space, you've got a recipe for a lot of social problems. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, maybe one thing that Peterson says is he calls this, or I guess it comes from Newman or Freud or Jung, this devouring mother pathology, right?
Yeah.
So it's like when you in the postmodern age, when you destroy the notion of patriarchy and matriarchy, both, in fact, because when I was growing up, I had no concept of masculinity or femininity. Both those things were unimportant to me, right? It's just, in fact, I think femininity was more important than me. I grew my hair long and I copied women. And so both those things in the postmodern age get kind of destroyed, right? And then they kind of become subliminal and underground. And then the pathological side of those arises. So you get the tyrannical father and you get the devouring mother.
There's this aspect of the ahistoricity as well. So we're in an age where we need 72 words to describe gender, yet nobody's able to use the word androgynous. I mean, the concepts of androgyny go right back, at least as far back as Greek mythology.
Well, Adam was not a man. He was androgynous, wasn't he? I mean, the original Adam, in a biblical sense, was androgynous. Am I correct about that?
I haven't read.
He was both, let's say, both male and female, and then that split into, and then God split man into male and female, and in some certain sense that and every person is sort of every person is every person has masculine and feminine qualities, obviously. And then this split, in Jungian terms, the split is like the animus develops in the female, and the anima develops in the male. This repressed masculine, the repressed feminine, and I think that's what we're seeing right now is that the polarities have become unconscious, and then the repressed aspects of those polarities are coming to the surface. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that's kind of the problem I always had with Catholicism, or I guess Christianity in general. I mean, in university, my nickname was the Antichrist. So it's interesting coming into this space with Peterson, because I feel like we've done this Kardashian on inverse angles coming at it, and then it ended up pretty much in the same space. So, I mean, I do have some criticisms of some of the stuff that he's gotten into, like the dominance hierarchy. I got a real problem with that.
The what?
The dominance hierarchy?
Yeah.
I don't think the concept is remotely robust enough to actually cover that whole domain.
Didn't he change that in a sense? And didn't he sort of say, I should be the competence hierarchy? Didn't he say?
Yeah, and I still don't think that's enough. So let's look at it as influence hierarchies. These influence hierarchies are structured around different aspects of social capital. Dominance being the most lowest possible resolution one. Competence being higher resolution. Communication. I mean, there's all these different things. If you start looking at it as an influence hierarchy, it's not explicitly male anymore. It's not completely a male domain. There's a means of accounting for other things within the competence hierarchy and start to address some of the issues of corruption within hierarchy. Background here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got to take this one sec. So I think a concept like an influence hierarchy has a lot more workability to it. I think the criticism, Peterson seems really soft on this criticism of the economy, business, and how the hierarchy all ties into this. I think the interview you did with Pinker, Pinker kind of took him to task on that a little bit. It's like, this isn't all a bed of roses here in the economy. There is a lot of corruption all over the place. There's a lot of incompetence all over the place. Having worked in IT for 20 years and with some of the biggest businesses around, and worked, done jobs for Fortune 500 companies, I've been vastly underwhelmed in terms of the degree of competence at that level.
Vastly overwhelmed or underwhelmed? Underwhelmed by the level of confidence. So being very little competence, just a lot of power and little competence.
Yeah, well, I mean, anytime you get the accretion of organization, then you start to deal with the bureaucratic stuff, and you get too much bureaucracy, and people just start building little fiefdoms of power around them, and they're not there for the organization. They're there to protect their power structure. I mean, there's another thing Peterson hasn't talked about with the hierarchy is the whole idea of the Peter principle, which comes from the military. So someone gets promoted just past their degree of competence, and then they're basically stuck there in that position. So they're not only stuck there, the organization is stuck around them as well.
So what do you think he's right about? Or So you said that the idea of competence hierarchy is not a robust, and not a robust. I have to think about that a little bit. Not a robust concept. It should be the influence hierarchy. That would be more accurate, right?
I think it is.
Okay. And do you have any other major criticisms of his ideas, of his principal ideas?
Of the core ideas, I mean, there's not really that much. There's bits of nuance here and there. The other thing, when I went to see him in Toronto a couple of weeks ago with my sons, there was one thing I wrote down mid-lecture. He was talking about Jung's criticism of Freud and Nietzsche and the basically being impossible to create values. It's So I see a lot of, so he seems to have placed the context. Here's the individual, here's the biological substrate. Where are all the layers in between here? Yeah, you can't recreate this layer of value. That's pretty obvious. You've got a couple of million years worth of evolutionary evolution around that. No, you're not going to recreate that level. But let's dig a little bit deeper into the cultural level here. And I think something that the Weinstein brothers got into, when you have to develop your own model, then you start engaging with the world in a different manner. That's more towards getting towards this flow state stuff. Okay,
I'm not sure if can you refine that or make that a little bit more clear for me to understand? I'm not sure if I get it.
Okay, I think you basically do have to create your whole value system. You're not creating it from scratch, but you're testing everything in your toolbox. If you haven't actually tested it and actually mastered it, then it's not really your tool set.
Well, maybe both things are true. You create values, but you draw on archetypes at the same time.
So
you're doing both those things simultaneously.
In Freemasonry, there's a metaphor of digging into the foundations of the old temple and kind of rebuilding from there. So I think he's also got an aspect of that in his philosophy where everything's kind of blown apart, but you're going back, digging into the foundations, rebuilding from the archetypes, and kind of reinvigorating the whole thing. And it's, that's that burning off of the deadwood process that has to happen regularly. And the more you defer it, well, forest fires get out of control.
Yeah, but what about the value? What about creating values? How do we create values? I mean, it seems like there's universal values, right? There's love and hate, and there's all these, and then there's good.
So you're not inventing your values. You're creating your value reference. You're creating your own maps of meaning. Really, not creating them yourself, then you've just adopted somebody else's.
Okay, you've just become like what Gurdjieff called mechanical man. You're just mechanical in your activity. So becoming conscious.
Automaton, you're running on script. You're not really autonomous. It's all reactive behavior, and so much behavior is completely deeply habituated.
Right. So then what does an individual mean? Like, how do we become an individual, because, I guess there's very few individuals in some sense. It's like, we're all individual, but how many people are actually individuals? I mean, how many people have
it's the process
become conscious souls in a sense, or
I think that is the process of individuation.
Yeah.
So,
and if you read Newman's book, he talks about that being this, you're arising from the maternal or the matriarchy, and the patriarchy arises from that, right? And then we have our society right now, which has to kind of, and then you get Jung, and then you have to kind of go back, and you have to kind of reunite with the feminine, the matriarchy, something like that.
Well, it's got to be that Ouroboros thing happening, and I mean,
it's got to be what, or
Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail.
Yeah, well, yeah, you come up from that, and then you develop consciousness, and that's been very much a male. In the Judeo-Christian, it's been very much a patriarchy in some sense, but perhaps we're moving to. What's that?
If you dig into the roots, so I spent a good chunk of time studying Sefer Yetzirah. The transcription of Abraham's original vision. It's like a technical analog to Genesis 1:1. It's the
that's the Kabbalah text, isn't it? No, is that what I'm thinking about? Or?
It's supposed to be the foundational, like the first written philosophical.
Right.
I don't know how much truth there is to that in terms of its temporal placement. It has been placed like 200 AD or later. Anyways, it goes through the creation of existence through the alphabet. That's where the tree of life, the cube of space, and all that stuff comes in. But Yah, Lord of hosts, creates the world through three divine seraphim, or feminine angelic figures: number, letter, and sound. So right at the foundation of it, there's this intertwining of the masculine and feminine.
Well, that's interesting. That's like that counter to the Trinity, because the Trinity is all male, isn't it? You just mentioned that there were three female principles.
Yeah, I think part of what
I'm not an
happened,
expert in this stuff, so I'm kind of you know flailing around here, but
I think in terms of the Christian context, you got the development of the cultural tradition. You got all the stuff that's going on with the Roman Empire, and basically, as the state of Rome is collapsing, and this power structure is tied to the land physically. Well, if you can't control that land anymore, power structure is gone. Put that power structure up in the air, unassailable to the common people, and then suddenly you've got dominion over everything. So I think it's kind of a corruption of the philosophy, and intentional corruption in order to exert power. I mean, if there's a criticism I ever had of Christ, is that he didn't do a very good job on error correction or making sure that the transmission wouldn't be corrupted. But I mean, that's
interesting, because that's what Jacob Lieb, his whole theory was that the Messiah, the Christian revelation was incomplete in some kind of a way, and that Jesus was not liberated yet, and that you had to go and liberate Jesus, and that was his sort of thing. That Jesus's soul, in some sense, was trapped, and that's why there's so much suffering around Christianity.
Yeah, it's an interesting psychological read on it.
It's one read, and the other read he had was that the tradition broke in half. So his idea was the Jews need to embrace the Messiah, need to embrace the Christian, and the Christians need to come back to the Jews to bring the tradition together. Like the tradition had been broken at the point of Jesus, which was, there's all of these different interpretations, right? Some of the Jewish mysticism says that God was this, that the human needs to heal God. It's not the other way around, right? Job, and this was part of Jung's idea that Job's mission was in a sense to heal God and because God was the God principle was God, because God created the world and God created duality, right? God created suffering.
Yeah.
And that the human being's job, I guess it's like a bit what you're saying about creating values. The human being's job is to heal the divine rather than the other way around.
Unity. So there's one aspect of the cosmology that says that the universe was created by the numinous differentiating itself or shattering itself into a million pieces, basically.
Yeah.
So that it could become differentiated in order to understand and know itself. And then, our job is to basically figure out the meaning.
Yeah.
Reintegrate that. So it's that I think that's a segue for me for Peterson and Harris, which I think we've chatted a bit about in text. But Harris always comes off to me like a tourist. Like he doesn't read for me like someone who's really experienced yira or that kind of trembling fear, divine piety. Like he's never really.
Well, I wouldn't presume to understand what his experience is particularly, but I do think that the fact that he's done this Buddhist retreat and then he's trying to invent the secular religion is problematic, So he wants to, like, he studied with his great Dzogchen teacher, and yet he wants to interpret the whole thing in his own way, and in a secular materialistic, way, which is unthinkable, really, if he was really operating within the domain of truth in terms of his relationship with whatever this particular teacher was trying to pass on to him. So I think, and I think he has this very sharp kind of analytical intellect, but he just doesn't seem to grasp symbology in the symbolic world in any way. He just reduces that to its, he just reduces that to its lowest denominator over and over again. And, really, it's funny that I was listening to his discussion, and all the religions he was criticizing were where ISIS and Scientology, all these like modern,
that's
what he was criticizing, and that those religions are as a result of this I think materialistic reductionist point of view, trying to just take the techniques out of the living body of the tradition.
Yeah, the idea of arte techne. So there's the technical competence required to exercise the art, but if you don't have the art together, then it doesn't have the life to it.
Yeah, or even in left brain, right brain, it's like he's a completely left brain, or left brain character in a sense.
So when Peterson talks about transcendence or tragedy, like you can see he's been there. Like he embodies it. It possesses him when he talks about it. It's not some abstract concept where with Harris, he's kind of smart and it's all pretty abstract and he's very elevated. And I'm waiting for the Pangburn talks to come out officially so I can actually go through that and see how that discussion went. But watching Jonathan Pajot's reactions doesn't sound like it went too far.
Well, so Peterson put forward this very elaborate definition of what he means by God. It's like 20 different things, and he couldn't even just say it. He had to actually read it because he'd thought about this stuff for 20 years, and then Sam Harris interrupts him and said, "Excuse me, Jordan, is this the same God that says you can't masturbate?" It's like, okay, are you guys talking about the same thing in any sense? It's like, no.
It's like a little high school jab. Like, come on, seriously, do we have to have a real conversation here? And you gotta play this shit. Like, what's this all about?
Yeah, and also it was I felt as exactly. It was an adolescent response. Like, okay, you don't like the rules, right? So you want to do it all yourself, right? But I don't think it works that way. I just don't think it works that way.
Well, we need to have some more robust conversations around that too. So I think if you go through a lot of the biblical quotes, like in the beginning is the Word, and the Word was with the Logos, and the Word was the Logos. All that stuff starts to take on a meaningful depth, and you don't have to be religious in order to get that. So I think, so the Logos is, as I envision, it's like your own personal relationship with the numinous. So beyond the tetragrammaton of the Logos is the numinous. So Ayin Sof, Ayin Sofer, nothingness, limitless, light. So that is the high unity, but our human mediation point to that is through the Logos, literally through the Logos. So the Yod is the representation of the rabbi's hand pointing to divinity. Hey, window, frame of reference. Vav is a nail binding the next Hey, another frame of reference. So you have the highest ideal framed against the present, against the future, in a coherent frame of reference. I mean, conceptually, it's like boom. Something clicked for me with that a while ago. And I've thought about the tetragrammaton quite a bit. I mean, that's core in that visualization for separated Sira that I did, posted on my personal YouTube channel. That's going back, I don't know, 15, 20 years now. Back when Flash 4 was a thing, a long time ago. So I think we start reframing some of these discussions about, okay, where is the numinous appropriate in the conversation and where is the Logos appropriate in the conversation? And I think most cases, the Logos is where we need to be actually addressing this stuff.
I'm not very versed in this stuff, so you have to explain it to me a little bit more in layman's terms, because because again, it's not my tradition. So the Logos is the point of entry, the point of contact to the numinous. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, that's how I'd kind of visualize it. So,
and that's speech, speech or divine, divine sacred speech, or
it's language in some capacity.
it's language. Okay.
Yeah. So Hebrew has no vowels in it. It's all consonants.
Yeah.
So there's an idea within magic that you have the fundamental resonance of everything. That's just kind of this undifferentiated white noise. And the way of generative process is by adding syncopation or punctuation into that white noise, and you start creating structure. So language is a means of doing that with sound. But so back to Sefer Yetzirah, it's number, letter, and sound. And then with the Hebrew
number, letter, and sound.
And then with the Hebrew alphabet, every letter also represents a noun. So Aleph is an ox. Bet is a house. Gimel is camel. Dalet is door. Yeah, it's been a while since I dug deeper into the language stuff.
What does that stuff have to do with? I mean, is there a relationship to that tradition and Masonry? Are those two? Or this is a separate area of study for you?
Overlapping areas of study. So there's stuff in Paul Foster Case, or the old tarot, which was the basis of Paul Foster Case's work. So there's iconography in there, which is shared with Freemasonry. The Craft Lodge is about the building of Solomon's Temple. The Royal Arch is about the rebuilding of the Second Temple under Zerubbabel. Cryptic Rite goes back to the First Temple again and digs deeper into the Hieramic story. Preceptory, Knights Templar digs back into the story of Zerubbabel again, and then other degrees kind of go off in different directions from there. So there's an overlap to Judaic tradition. The esoteric history of Freemasonry, they trace back into Egypt through Judaic tradition.
Okay.
So I think the glyph, so the tetragrammaton, or what we've anglicized as Jehovah, that word itself is also the combination of the verb to be in the past, present, and future tenses. So
to be in the past, present, and future tenses.
The verb to be, that construction of the word is basically a concatenation of to be in the past, the present, and the future. Some meanings are quite literal. So
interesting.
Yeah, we're made in his image. Well, write that word vertically. It's an anthropomorphic figure. Christ saying, I come in his name. Put the shin in the middle of the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and yeah, Yeshua, literally in his name. The fundamentalist reading, I think, with all this stuff is really where it starts to fall down. And Harris has got that kind of fundamentalist. I don't know if he's just not willing to engage, or it's easy for him to sidestep it by saying, oh yeah, it's this crude stuff, instead of digging into some of the deeper stuff behind it.
Well, it's like he's formed his atheist. He's formed his family in a way, and he's got a kind of. There's a psychological expression I heard about called tribal block, right? And so he's made this tribe, and he can't think outside that. And it's just it's impossible for him to think outside of that, or it's possible for.
It's the descent into homodoxy.
The descent into what?
Into homodoxy.
Homodoxy. What does that mean? It's a word I'm unfamiliar with.
Group thing. So
group thing. Yeah.
Question of where does the left go wrong? My response is same where every fucking one else does. They go from homodoxy, groupthink, to orthodoxy, to dogma.
No, that's a good way to put it.
It's a standard path. As soon as people start stepping into the echo chamber and not accounting for difference in viewpoint, that's the way it's going to play out. And I think the left really did that. I mean, there were a number of things like, everybody's got a valid viewpoint, or everybody's got a valid voice. And Peterson echoes this to a degree when he says, everybody's got something to teach you. Well,
yeah, that's right. It's exactly what I was talking with Paul. He said the same thing. Like, that's a profound thing that Peterson says. Like, you know, each person really has something to teach you. So
maybe, but
not even that. Each person is like, not even your dog and everything that appears has something to teach you. It's like,
there's opportunity to learn everywhere. I mean, I learned process optimization in a dish picking job. So
in a what job?
As a dish pig.
As a dish pig. Okay, I've done that as well. Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, there's opportunity to learn everywhere, but this whole coupling those two ideas, everybody's got, you know, something of value to say, and I don't know. It's like, if you've individuated yourself, sure. If you haven't, you're signal to noise ratio. That's it.
Or you're just a voice of the collective in some sense. You're just the super ego speaking in a way. You're not.
For the same point made by 1,500 other people.
Yeah.
Sorry, need a bit more.
Yeah. Or you just need living thought, or you need, you know, give me something to work with here. Not just this mechanical repetition of different, you know, hypnotic formulas of political righteousness.
These axiom constructions. So, you've either got the pointed axiom, you're with us or against us, you fall one side or the other of the watershed, or you've got axioms that create a bounded space. You don't go outside of the channels. But at the same time, all those axioms mean very fucking different things to different people, depending on where you are in the personality dimension.
Mm-hmm.
One axiom could be extremely helpful to you, say if you're high in neuroticism or something like that. But if you're very low in agreeableness, it might create a completely toxic personality. So you really need to understand where these things are grounded in the perspective of who's hearing it and what it's giving.
So have you absorbed this whole 5-trait personality thing from Peterson as well, and thought about that, or did you know about that before? Or
I'd come across bits of it before. I mean, at 20 years in IT, I spent a lot of time as a manager as well, and dealing with HR and hiring process and stuff like that. So I tried to dig into what was the current psych there, not just see so much buzzword and crap. It was like reading sales flyers from any other industry. Usually interesting bits come up.
Because I've found that's kind of informed how I look at people in the world. Peter's articulations of the five traits, Peterson's articulations of the five traits. You know, for instance, I'm very high in openness, and my wife's very high in conscientiousness. So it's, otherwise I probably couldn't survive on some level, right? I mean, unless there was that balance in our relationship, and then again, then I understand, why she's reactive to certain things. It's characterological, right? It's not a sin or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you blame a person for being who they are, and I guess because of my character being very, not conservative, right? High in openness. I always thought conservative people were stupid on some level. And I see that I'm kind of wrong about that. There's a wisdom to that as well, right? There's a wisdom to all these different personality types. And in Buddhism, there's something called the 5 families of Buddha, and they're you can almost map them on this more empirical scientific model.
There's something with the Venus and the pentagram as well with that.
You can map that on. So I think that wisdom has kind of existed on some esoteric level, before it gets articulated into scientific, rational, empiricism, like different personality types fit in a Buddhist frame, that they fit in a mandala in a certain kind of way. The white Buddha is in the center, and that's openness, and then you have these, you have the red Buddha in the west, and you have this sort of cosmology of different personality types, and each person is valid, within that cosmology.
Well, I think that gets towards the construct of truth that I'll use. So everybody's got a small T piece of the truth. It's an isolated perspective. The big T then must combine and integrate all of those small T's. And if small T's don't fit into the big T, well, they're not part of it. You start to filter and figure things out. So that I'll hook back into Sephri Yetzirah again and the construction of the cube of space. So Yah, Lord of Hosts, creates the world through these three divine seraphim. The first action is to take couplets or triplets of the three letters in different organizations to map out the 6 surfaces of the cube. And then the 3 mother letters mark out the X, Y, and Z axes within the center of the cube. And 7 double letters mark out the 6 surfaces again, and then the 7th one cinches in the center.
You're losing me, man. I'm just you're losing me. I can't follow. I can't follow that. I need to see a picture, I think.
I can send you.
It's just far too esoteric for me to follow just like that as you're saying it.
I'll bounce a link for you, but it lays out the physical geometry. X, Y, and Z axis of 3D space. It sets the outer bounds of that space. It's an interesting pattern. There's a lot going on there. That's one of the things that struck me about Hebrew early. I wish I knew more about Sanskrit for the same reason, that these really archaic languages, there's aspects of Hebrew, even though it comes out of the Phoenician, that there's a coherence that doesn't seem to be there in other languages. Like the whole thing with gematria, there's a weird set of sub-patterning there, especially if you're digging gematria in Genesis 1:1. That's the numbers set out is like the layout of Euclidean geometry. There's the error correction thing, and then it stops at the end of that chapter and doesn't continue from there, which is odd. But I remember one of Peterson's lectures where he's digging into basically the anthropology of the Bible and looking at the different groups like the Yahwists, the Elohimists, and digging into that a little bit more to see where kind of the nuances of the cultural traditions fold into that. So I mean, the names are different. Like Adonai is masculine Lord, Elohim the feminine, or Shekinah the feminine.
Well, this rabbi would say that in the Jewish tradition, the Holy Spirit is feminine, and he would always say that, you know, if women is not present, then God is not present. You know, it's like the two have to be together for God to be present.
And Judaism and Buddhism are the only organized traditions that I have any affinity with. I mean, I'm all over what Peterson's doing with the construct of the logos and everything else, but I would never identify myself as explicitly Christian, really. Gnostic. I mean, my holy trinity is math, physics, and chemistry.
You have affinity to Gnosticism or as well, or
Gnostic practice. I mean, the Gnosticism comes from the phrase of the gnomon, or the sphere in the sundial. One that sits and observes as things go around. So Gnosticism for me is the direct engagement of that process, not having it mediated by somebody else. You actually have to go and dig into it for yourself.
Why, you know, I almost wanted to ask Paul about this. Why is Christianity so terrified of these things? Like, you have the Gnostic fallacy and all that, and why are they so terrified of unusual? I guess it's because it's a huge institution like the Catholic Church, right? It's a billion people
and the bureaucracy.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. You know, but if you think, yeah. Well, I'm similar to you. My biggest affinity is, I guess, with Vajrayana and Zen, and also Jewish tradition, which is I'm just kind of, you know, I don't have I'm just dipping into a little bit like Peterson seems to be reviving the Christian myth for the West in some sense. Don't you think, or you don't see any value in that?
I do. I think he's on to something in the premise that we're untethered from history. And 20 years ago, there was in a music shop in Peterborough, and 2 young hip-hop guys in there and one guy starts bitching about whoever's playing on the music in the store, ripping off Diddy. The guy in the store goes, "Hey, come here." Puts down the Police album in front of him. He goes, "Look at the date." The guy's like, "Oh, no, your Diddy was like, what, 30 years later?" These people, it's like Christian. If you're Christian and you don't know what the Council of Nicaea is, regardless of whatever discussions of what went down there, if you don't know what the Council is, how do you call yourself a Christian? It's the, your whole ethos. How can you not know anything about its cultural tradition and actually understand it to some degree of depth? Like, that's kind of where I come from. Like, you can't just put on the Technicolor coat and, oh, I'm a Christian. Like, you got to engage it in some capacity. You need to understand and the historical thread of how things developed, understand how we got here. And that's one thing I really liked about the discussion with Peterson and Paglia, where they both have this really long view. If we want to look at the human condition.
Oh, yeah, they both have the long view. Yeah.
1,000 years long and across the breadth of cultural traditions.
Yeah.
A really robust and wide lens on human experience before we start making prognostications with what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, Paglia's amazing. I read her book Sexual Persona when I was in my 20s, and I think it changed my entire mind in some kind of a way in terms of how I saw these things.
Yeah, it was a heavy piece. I mean, that was Cultural Studies 101 for us. We got a copy of that one.
Yeah, you did that. You read that in Cultural Studies? They let you read that in Cultural Studies? It was possible to read that in
Cultural Studies 101 now, so that would have been 1991.
1991, yeah, when the book came out. That's about when I read it. Yeah. Huh. So you're a father. You have a bunch of kids. You work in computing, and what's your story?
Software and systems architecture. I got two boys. One of them's oh God, what did they just turn? 18 and 21.
Wow.
Oldest son is in the reserves, transferring into the Army. My youngest son's still in high school. He's working at a company called Northern Simulated Trading Systems for a virtual firearms range. So my youngest son and I are building a brand new virtual firearms platform.
Virtual firearms platform. Oh. Yeah.
It's a training platform, basically.
Okay, learning how to shoot. So you like to shoot things, I think.
I mean, play airsoft and stuff like that. Yeah.
You what?
I play airsoft and stuff like that. So I mean, that's the warrior monk ethos. So Freemasonry exercises the brain, the memory work, and all that stuff. And then I'm a desk jockey. I need to get out and get out from behind a desk, and I don't like euphemisms, especially in sport. It's ritualized combat. So let's get in there.
Okay. You're an interesting dude. I have a hard time following everything you say, but it's quite rich.
Yeah, the lateral thing, it's a little tough for people to come up sometimes.
Yeah.
Go off into the bushes occasionally. So I think you've read a couple of the Sephora Ben pieces that I've been working on.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I've read them deeply. I've grazed them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I in the sense I've read over them quickly, and I thought, okay, there's something going on here, but I couldn't say that I wouldn't say that I understood them, because I would have to really think through them to get it. Or maybe I'm not supposed to understand them. Maybe they're just some sort of a transmission that I'm not supposed to understand. I'm supposed to register on them on some subliminal level and absorb them that way.
So I'll roll back a bit. It's got to be close to 20 years ago now. Doing some visionary work on psilocybin, and just boom, got hit with this vision. Again, the triangle that's coming out. So it was a triangle. One sec, let me send it. I can send you the link.
He appeared to me in a flash and thunder. I am but a stone before him. That's your graphic?
That's the graphic I've been working on. It's actually a generative. So if you reload it quick, it'll it was like a lightning bolt.
I see. Yeah, yeah. When you reloaded it, okay, I see. It goes.
And it just kind of blew up, and those words, and left to figure it out. So that was about 20 years ago. I was involved with the Prineus work at that point, so that's the Paul Foster Case work, but this was before I got involved in mainstream Freemasonry. This vision was part of what led me in that direction, was to go through Paleolithic shamanism, follow that forward, and then basically go back. So most of the modern Western mystery traditions lift heavily from Freemasonry. Whether you're talking about any of the stuff that Carl was into, like AA or Thelema or Gardnerian Wicca, most of these people who started these traditions lifted a lot of ritual structure out of Freemasons. And so from the Prineus, I went into traditional Freemasonry under the Grand Lodge of Canada, reporting under the Grand Lodge of England, whatever that chain of command is. And from there, I started poking around with this idea, like, what inhuman condition is worthy of being written in stone? Like, what survives that test? And kind of taking that on at a personal level. And then 2 months ago, watching a YouTube lecture with James Flynn, the guy from the Flynn Effect, the IQ.
Don't know him, yeah.
So Flynn calls himself a moral philosopher who dabbles in psychology, but the Flynn Effect was looking at IQ studies and basically the fact that we're showing 30 points higher across the population than we were 100 years ago. Up until 1970, and then the Flynn Effect seems to have petered out and not just plateaued, but started to drop again. Flynn's premise on this was based off of the work of a Russian psychologist named Alexander Luria. And Luria went around and asked people different types of questions, like, okay, how are a fish and a crow similar? And they're not remotely at all. It's, fish swims in water, crow flies, crow can eat fish, fish can't eat crow, blah, blah, blah. So the end run of Luria's stuff was that he looked at 3 cognitive tool sets: abstraction with the application of logical reasoning, treating the hypothetical as potentially possible, and classification. So something just clicked with that. I can be an arrogant prick sometimes, I think. Peterson calls himself out for being kind of arrogant too. I dealt with a lot of really, I'll just say, straight up fucking stupid people, especially in positions of business or power. It's mind-boggling. Like, how do you get here when you can't tie your own shoes? But instead of sitting in that kind of arrogance, like, probe down. What the hell is actually going on in the broken thinking? And really, these tool sets, I mean, nothing's changed in the biological substrate in 100 years. But the cognitive, so I see a tie here between what Peterson was talking about with the Head Start program in the 60s, where they're trying to raise people up, school program and things like that. And, the end run was that didn't really work, other than the fact the kids who were better socialized did better. But I think in the same context of kind of social remediation, having access to effective cognitive tool sets, that means what's all the difference in the world. Like, I'm kind of pissed off because I had to learn all this shit on my own and dig pretty hard to find it out. Whereas, these tools should be available for people. Like, take something like the John Howard Society and their conflict resolution or anger management program, put that into the public health unit. Once every 2 years, a 1 or 2 week unit from grade 2 all the way through high school. Like,
it's kind of staggering how education is stagnant, I think. Like,
I mean, it ties into the resentments I had in terms against Christianity, in terms of its kind of look down your nose, holier than thou. It's like, that's fucking useless. It doesn't remediate anything. You need to give people meaningful tools and space to learn how to use them if you want to see actual change.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, to that degree, that's where I think Freemasonry comes in to at least at a pattern level. So sets of working tools, like cognitive working tools.
So cognitive working tools to make people more intelligent in a sense.
Yeah, just it's a better toolkit that they're carrying around with them. I mean, again, the biological substrate has not changed, but if you give people better tools off to the start, they're going to do a hell of a lot better. I mean, so that was kind of the old separation between, you know, upstairs and downstairs. If you want to use the Downton Abbey model. Upstairs always figured, you know, it was better because, you know, you could see the difference in people because they didn't quite have all those things there. And then we started to do a moralistic bullshit, like, you know, 4 forks and knives and spoons on the table, just to show or humiliate the people who don't know how to pick them up in the right order. Like that's some kind of meaningful differentiation at a social level.
Huh.
So anyways, the idea of those 3 domains of cognitive development. So abstraction, great. It's pretty useless if you don't apply logical reasoning. Logical reasoning isn't very good without the abstraction either. You start to get into accretion and bureaucracy and complete stagnation. The hypothetical, well, people are either Chicken Little, the sky's falling, or just like, nothing to see here. I don't see anything. And the classification. I mean, again, that's very much the resolution issue that Peterson's looking at. It's like, it's okay to have these short forms, but you need to understand when the short form is just the short form, and this is actually a whole domain of stuff behind it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be shift back and forth across those.
Well, short form meaning just abstraction, right? Like, or, you know, the map not being the territory.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's what I find about, you know, Harris is like, okay, he's trying to make the entire, he's trying, okay, yeah, rational abstraction being, you know, the answer to all human, you know, problems. It doesn't cut it. It's like making a map as big as the world, right? It's just, it doesn't get into the depths, right?
Yeah. What I've been trying to do with Sephora Ben, I guess, is take all this personal journey stuff and turn it into an open source model. So
an open source monologue? Is that what you said?
An open source model. So besides the text that I'm writing, as the, you know, the 1.0 version for feedback and criticism. So there's the text aspect of it that's broken down into vox and verba. So the vox would be, you know, this, he appeared to me in Flash and Thunder. That was actually like a personal transmission, to use the phrase, a direct connection, mystical space, where everything else is the verba, or like the commentary, the literal voice versus speaking in the voice of, to kind of use the Greek Christian tradition terminology. The second part of that is to build some visualization tools around the Big 5 personality stuff. So there's a couple of sites like openpsychometrics.org that have data sets. I'm more interested in looking at the Big 5 and population data rather than individual stuff.
Big 5 what? Big 5?
Population data. I'm looking at the Big 5 in the context of population data. I'm curious where more of the subgroups break out and things like that. So part of it's this, you know, transmission around mystical experience, and the other part is a set of tools of being able to actually dig into some of this stuff a bit and look at yourself over time. Like Peterson talks about the micro-skill development a little bit, and I don't think people are as fixed as we project. I think there's a lot of room for growth across all of the personality dimensions.
That was my initial misgiving about this is like, okay, how fixed is the human personality? And
It depends on how much you want to work.
Apparently, you eat a bit of psilocybin mushrooms, and you can increase openness 1 standard deviation or whatever. So obviously there are methods to seriously change the personality. Although it seems quite rare that people are in contact with a lot of these methods.
If people haven't engaged,
like some of the practices I've done in Buddhism are extremely physical, right? It's like,
yeah,
and I don't think people are aware that these practices exist and they can change you to a radical extent. You know, maybe if I did, and I could do some other kind of, I could go in a cave somewhere and do some other kind of practice for a year, and I could develop this other, visionary ability, which would change my personality. But then again, most of us kind of remain sort of, we don't change that much.
Well, people get fairly static in their habituations, and they don't, they stick to the comfort zone. They don't push outside of that too much. I mean, it's very rare to find people who engage with that innately. Most people won't dig into that transformative space until trauma forces them to.
Right, until crisis. I mean, that's certainly my case. I mean, crisis is just, you have to becoming dissembled, becoming destroyed by some event that happens in your life. It would be the only way that I would have gotten into this, at least initial investigation, because I still, consider myself a beginner, but, I'm kind of a beginner who has been beginning for a long time, so to speak. I don't know. Say that.
First on the scene, it was funny. Literally 2 weeks before I heard about him, I submitted a proposal for a TED Talk in Milton, close to here, looking at identity politics from a systems analysis perspective. A bunch of the same behavioral pattern stuff. But when he first came on board, I think my first message to a buddy of mine was, I want to start a mystery tradition with this guy. It's like, finally, here's someone in public domain who's looking at the breadth of material that has to be addressed. So, material in a lot of different directions. And then the depth of it. I mean, yeah, I've got a few criticisms of here and there, mostly specific little things, but in general process and principle, that's the way we need to be moving. And
yeah, well, that's the thing I was telling this to Paul the other day, is that I've met people in my life who I consider to, maybe have gone further than Peterson, but they're not public figures, right? And they're not having this enormous effect on the world. They might be having an enormous effect on the world in some subtle way that, we don't know. But I couldn't talk about them in a public space, and I couldn't talk about those meetings that I've had with people who are, who are very deep, because those people, first of all, are not interested in being public figures, probably, and second of all, that nobody would know what the hell I was talking about.
I think that's part of the problem with Peterson. He covers so much material in breadth that, a lot of people are picking up 2, 3 out of 10, and they're not really seeing a whole picture. So they're making really grossly misinformed assumptions about what it is he's actually saying. Yeah. A real lack of willingness to.
Yeah, and I guess it's just human nature, right? To make a cult of something, right? Like.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole fanboy.
To make a cult of the most superficial aspects of the thing, right?
Yeah.
Instead of reading Maps and Meaning, and going into the depth of that, people are getting into the most superficial political stuff, which is the least interesting.
And if you see, you see that from the Facebook groups and stuff as well. Like, I was in the boat party fairly early on, and like, it's the worst of the low-res conversations. And
well, I don't really have Facebook conversations anymore. I've just stopped doing it. because I found that it's like people even like you know, I can almost apologize to you because you wrote me a bunch of stuff and I can't respond to Facebook to chatting anymore. I don't want to do that. I want to do this kind of thing, right? Because this is so much. This is such a it's so much of a bigger dimension, having a real conversation than having a text conversation, and all of these text conversations leads to misunderstanding and animosity and gross, you know, so I've become allergic to chatting, you know, in text, and I think chatting in text is almost it's like the reason all this long form conversation is suddenly becoming appealing and people are into that is because this chatting in text has become so toxic, and that people, you know, are like, you know, have been hurt by that in some kind of a way. Right. And they need to have a fuller story. They need a longer, you know, bigger story. I mean, they need to have conversations with people. Like it's like when you have a conversation with people, there's something happens, right? Something really happens. You don't just. It's not this masturbatory. I don't know how to say that, but I don't know if you had that feeling as me. But you're a techie guy, so you're on computers all the time. But I just stay away from chatting with people these days. It's like. I want to move out of the social network world into you know, because I think a lot of people lost their soul in that space in some kind of a way. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, it's disconnected. I tweeted something a couple of weeks ago. Tune in, turn on, drop out, reversing that, like turn off, tune out, drop in, turn off the shit, tune out the noise, drop in and actually see people in mid space, like actually, or if not that, then at least like you can see the person when you're talking and actually have some kind of depth of engagement there. Yeah. See more of that kind of coming up. I don't go out and do a lot of socialization. I don't go and see shows and stuff like that. But people I'm hanging out to, there's some better conversations starting to happen. But at the same time, people I went to university with who had a really great degree of respect for their intelligence and their integrity, and just going completely fucking brain dead. You can't process new information anymore. They're just totally shut down. And it's sad and kind of frightening to see.
Yeah, people shut down, right? That's true. Yeah, people shut down, become very, the learning process stops at some point and it's become ossified. Yeah.
Engaging the infinite learning curve.